Hi, this is Mary from the Daily Sew. In this video, I wanted to show how to make these easy, reusable cloth bags for your bulk shopping. I've been focusing on reducing our family's food packaging waste, and so bulk shopping was very obvious. What I couldn't figure out was how to shop without producing just as much waste. At first, I was reusing the brown paper bags that the store provided, and that was a little bit complicated with all the bin numbers and scratching out. But when I got the oats from one week mixed in with the raisins from the next week, I knew I had to find a different way. Using jars and containers are good for some things like peanut butter, but I didn't want to use it for everything. It was just too much jars in all the shopping bags and too much clanging around in the car. So it occurred to me I could make these cloth bags much like the mesh bags I use for produce. All I had to do was figure out how to get the bin number on the cloth bag and to get it off that same bag for the following week's shopping. Well, that solution proved to be rather simple. So if you're ready to reduce your food packaging, let's go. All right, for this project, you're going to need some fabric, and you're going to look for a kind of a nice, tightly woven, not too tight, something washable, because you're going to throw these in the wash. So muslin or flour sack towels or sheeting, even shirts, like Oxford cloth shirt. Those are all good choices. You can also use decorative towels because you can incorporate the decoration into your bag. What I wouldn't use is a dark or a busy print cotton fabric, because when you go to write the bin number on it, you're not going to see it. So save this for quilts or gift wrap or something else altogether. You're going to need a ruler. A small ruler is handy but not necessary. You're going to need thread, scissors, a marking tool, pins, a small bodkin or safety pin, and cord for your bag. And you can use various things for the cord. There's finger knitting, selvage, shoelaces, ribbon, and cotton twill tape, whatever you have. You're going to need some cord stops, and they come in plastic and metal. You might need to buy these, but sometimes you can find them on items you no longer use. So look around and see what you have. Now our bag is going to be a pretty simple, straightforward kind of bag with a casing across the top, and the cords will come out one side. There'll be a hole for the cords to come out with the cord stop there. I'm going to show you how to make the bag with the serger, which is super fast if you have one, and how to make it on a sewing machine. Varies a little bit, but not much, and that method would also be good for hand. If you're going to use a serger, a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and if sewing machine and hand, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now, the popular sizes that I've seen in pre-made bags that are for sale are 15 by 12, 12 by 10, and 10 by 8. I really like this 10 by 8 inch bag. It's pretty convenient for me, but everyone has their preferences. So this is a 2-piece bag, a back and a front, and that's how we're going to lay out the cutting instructions here. So you're going to put down the dimensions of how big you want your bag, and then you're going to add your seam allowance, which is a 1/2 inch in this case, to the sides and the bottom edge. Then you're going to need a 1/2 inch across the top for the casing, the back side of the casing, and a 1/4 inch seam allowance on top of that to finish off that casing edge. So altogether, height-wise, whatever you choose to make your bag, you're going to add 1 1/4 inches to that for the seam allowances and the casing. And you're going to add 1 inch widthwise for the seam allowances. And that is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you're going to serge and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you can just trim off that 1/4 inch on your serger. So again, this is for 2 pieces, and you might have your fabric cut out in a way that there's a fold, and if so, you'll just eliminate one of the seam allowances, and we'll talk more about that later. So if you want to make a 12 by 10 inch bag, you're going to cut your pieces, front and back pieces, 13 1/4 by 11 inches wide, 13 1/4 high by 11 inches wide. Again, that includes a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And if you want to make a 10 by 8 bag, you're going to add that 1 1/4, so it's going to be 11 1/4 high by 9 inches wide, and again, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And these are again for 2 pieces, a front and a back. And if we're going to have a fold, we're going to talk about that later in the video. If you are sewing by hand, a 1/2-inch seam allowance is good as long as your fabric doesn't unravel very easily. 1/2-inch seam allowance will be perfect. So again, this layout, if you had a fold, if you cut a long rectangle for your 2 pieces are connected by the fold, you'll just eliminate one of those side 1/2 inches. And if your fold goes across the bottom, then on your total height, you're going to eliminate that 1/2-inch seam allowance on the bottom. All right, so I have some towels and I'm going to incorporate the embroidery into my bag. So on this one, where the embroidery is in the center of the towel and not in the corner, I'm just going to use that as my side seam and the design will wrap around the side of the bag. So I'll cut it out across the top and then down the side, and that'll just wrap. And then I have all this other fabric up here from the towel to make some other bags from. When you place your design to cut out, if you can use a selvage edge of the fabric or towel or sheet or an already hemmed edge, especially say if it was the top of your bag like this and you have that hemmed or selvage edge, then for the casing all you have to do is fold it over and you don't have to finish off that edge. And that makes it one less step you have to do. So think about that when you lay out your bags on your fabric. And of course that's a fold, so I'm not going to need a seam allowance for that side. I'll just need them for the top and the bottom and one side. Now this design is in the corner, so it's pretty easy to incorporate. I could work around that stain and make 2 pieces, 2 separate pieces, or I could just fold it and leave the stain on the bag. Or I could try some bleach to get it out. And then if you have something like this little eyelet area, and you don't want that in the bag part because you don't want your produce coming out, your grains coming out of the bag. So just maybe incorporate that into the casing like this. You could just fold it over and stitch right where that row of open stitches are. And when you're working with repurposed fabric, a shirt, a sheet, old towels, look for worn spots first and either patch them or work around it. So here's the towel that we're going to cut first. And I'm going to make mine 10 by 12. So I need to measure it over 10 for the bag, and then I need to add just a 1/2-inch seam allowance because I've got that fold there. I don't need a seam allowance on that side, so it's already attached. So I'm just going to measure over 10.5 for my 10-inch bag. Now you make sure your fabric is already washed because you want to throw these bags into the wash machine after you use them. So wash before you cut. Now I'm going to make it 12 inches tall. But I need to add a 1/2-inch seam allowance for the bottom seam, and then I need to add a 1/2 inch for the back of the casing and a 1/4 inch to finish off that top raw edge. So I'm going to stick that there and I'm going to mark it. And then at this point, you can go ahead and cut it out with scissors, or you can always use a rotary cutter, which are pretty convenient when you're just doing straight lines. And think about when you cut out what you're left with on your scraps. So I've had these 2 pieces over here, and I'm going to end up just cutting them across as well and sewing them together because they will be perfect for the back of a different bag. So we're trying to eliminate our waste here. So think about your layout as you cut these bags out. So I have cut out all my bags and I've even decorated them. This one is going to have a fold across the bottom, and I'm just going to end up sewing the side seams and finishing off the top. And I decorate it with just cork and acrylic paint. The next couple bags all have a side fold because I found that very convenient. This one folds on the side, and I've used the hem of the towel for the top. So when it comes to my casing, all I have to do is fold it down and sew it down. I don't have to finish that off. This is just machine stitch. It did pucker a little because of the lightweight fabric, but luckily with bags, fit and how it drapes on the body is not a problem. You don't have to worry about little mistakes like that. And you have this one that you've seen with the side fold, and we'll do the top and the side. We'll do that by sewing machine, that particular bag. The little chicken here, hen. And then the one with the fabric marker is actually 2 separate pieces, actually 3. Those are those 2 scrap pieces I've sewn together to make the back. And this one bag we're going to make first, and we're going to do it by serger. So Either way, sewing machine or serger, you're going to line up all your raw edges, and then on one side of the bag toward the top, you're going to have to leave open for the cords to come through to make your casing. The right or left side doesn't matter. But then you'll sew the rest of the open seams, depending on how many open seams you have. So first, you're going to measure down for your casing, and the casing is what the cord goes through. And you're going to measure down 1 1/4 inches. Go ahead and mark that. Then when you take it to your machine, you're going to stick your needles in at the mark. And serger or sewing machine, you can stick your serger needles in at the mark. And then you're going to sew down your open edges and sew them closed. Okay, we've sewn our open edges. Of course, we left the opening for the casing, and we've left the top completely open, but we've got the other edges closed. And now we need to finish off this top edge. We need to clean finish it. And when you're serging, this is the next step. When you're sewing by sewing machine, we'll do one step in between. So go ahead and take it to your serger and serge the overcast edge as if it is one piece of cloth. Don't trim anything off. All right, we've finished off that top raw edge all the way down as if it was one piece of cloth. And now we need to finish off this casing edge. It is a raw edge and it will unravel, so we need to make that clean. So lay out your bag opening like it's flat. You're going to have this pleat of the side seam down it, and you're just going to sew straight down, and you'll cut off the thread tails but none of the fabric. You will get that little pleat, but it won't matter in the end. So just go ahead and serge that clean. All right, that is serged clean. With a needle, you could put the thread tails through the stitches, or you could just catch them when you sew the casing down. Okay, let's put that bag to the side and work on the one by the sewing machine. I've got my raw edge across the top and the sides, and this time I have a fold. I still, however, I'm going to have to start down a little ways from one of the edge, obviously the open edge for the casing. So I'm going to go ahead and measure down that 1 1/4 that we need for both finishing the raw edge and the 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. For the casing, but I'm actually going to mark down a little bit more, 1/8 of an inch more, just because you could do it however you want. Because when you do this little fold to clean that top edge, and then you fold it over again to make the casing, I don't know, it gets a little tight. So I like to give myself a little extra room there. Okay, starting at the mark, go ahead and sew the open edges shut. If you have two straight edges, if you have a fold at the bottom like this one, just remember to leave open the area for the casing, and of course leave the top open as well. And remember, right sides together when you're sewing this. So now I've sewn the open edges shut, but I've left the opening for the casing up at the top, and of course I left the top open. And it's the top edge when we serge that we finished off first, but when we do it by sewing machine or by hand, we're going to finish off the top a little differently. And so we need to finish the casing edge off first in order for everything to come out clean. And the way you finish off the casing edge is, and this is why you have the wider seam allowance of a 1/2 inch, is you're going to fold that seam allowance, 1/2 of it, down so that the raw edge meets the stitching. And so basically you folded it 1/4 of an inch. It's a 1/2 inch. You folded it in half toward the stitching. Do it on one side, do it on the other, and press it. And you're pressing down a little below the opening, 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch or so below the opening there. See, below where we stopped the stitches or we started the stitches. And then go ahead and double that fold. So fold it over again on itself. So now you've folded a 1/2 inch total, 2 1/4 inch turns, and press it. And again on the other side. And that is a good way to burn your fingers, so be careful. So here's the top of the bag. It's upside down facing you, but here's the top of the bag. And you can see there's the opening, and it's nice and clean right now. Of course, I have to go and stitch the seam allowance down. I'm going to start at one edge, go across the top or the bottom, and then down the other edge. And that fold should be pretty far in, so you don't have to sew right on the edge of there. You don't have to sew right on the edge. You can sew kind of in the middle, sewing everything down. But when you go to sew, because this is lightweight fabric and that's a tiny little area, what you want to do is put your needle down into the fabric first. Then your pressure foot should be lowered down on the machine, and then you hold those thread tails with your left hand. And that way, the needle won't push the fabric down into the feed dogs. So just hold on to those thread tails with your left hand when you start to do the first couple stitches, and sew down and across and back up. All right, now it is done by folding it over twice and stitching it down. Now we need to make the casing, and in order to do that, we have to finish off this top raw edge first. And we can do it the same way as we just did those casing edges. We could fold it over a little bit, 1/4 inch or so, and press it. And then when we go to fold the casing, we'll stitch it down and that edge will be clean. So that's method 1. Method 2 is to take, if you have a sewing machine, an overcast stitch or a zigzag stitch and just stitch all the way around the top edge. And then you'll just fold it down and sew it down to make the casing. It's kind of like we did with the serging edge. We'll just fold it down. So if you're doing the hem method and you're going to fold it 1/4 inch and then you're going to fold it again to secure that hem when you do the casing, you might want to run a basting stitch 1/4 inch down all the way across the top, and that would be a guideline where to fold and press. It just makes it easier. Now you can see why you might want that little extra room on the top, because when you start doing all this folding, it gets a little tight. So take it to your pressing board and fold down the edge, or take it to your machine and put an overcast or zigzag stitch around the edge. All right, so I have my sewing machine zigzag stitch, and then I have my serged bag. And now it is time to make the casing. You simply want to fold down the casing so it meets the top of the opening. You don't want it to go below the opening, because if you did that, the opening for the cord would be on the inside of the bag. And I'll show you what I mean. Anytime you want to test something out, pinning it in place instead of stitches really gives you a good idea of how something's going to turn out before you commit with needle and thread. So see, the opening is on the inside of the bag if I folded it all the way down, and you wouldn't be able to get a tight, when you pull the cord, you wouldn't get a nice tight closing. So you want to make sure that the opening is on the top of the bag and not the inside of the bag. And then to do that, you'll just fold the casing down so it meets the top of the where you stopped stitching or where you started stitching. Go ahead and measure what that is, and it should be about 1/2 inch, but we're being loosey-goosey on this project. And then measure that distance, fold it over and measure that distance in a couple of other places. Then when you pull between the pins, the fabric will just go there. But I want to point out, if you have a side seam, you want that seam allowance to be going all in the same direction, the seam allowance inside the casing. You don't want it twisted like that. And that's because when you go to put the cord in with the bodkin or the safety pin, you don't want to fight it. You want to kind of go over it. You just want to skim over that seam allowance inside the casing. You don't want to fight against it. So make sure all your seam allowance, if you have any side seam allowance, is going the same direction. Then go ahead and give it a good press and stitch it down. Whether it's folded or overcasted or serged, you're just going to stitch that casing down in place. All right, so I have some stitched down, and this one I wanted to show, this one was the hem of a towel, so I didn't have to finish that edge off, I just got to fold it. And this one was the selvage of the fabric. The selvage is the part on the loom. It's tightly woven, it doesn't unravel. So when you can incorporate those things, you'll save yourself a couple of steps. And this one had the selvage on the casing edge, so I didn't have to finish off that edge, which is kind of nice. So I have all my casings sewn, and now it's time to put in the cord. This cord happens to be selvage off of some fabric I've used for another project. It's really tightly woven, it's the selvage edge of the fabric, and it's not going to come out. Whatever you use just has to be as long as your opening of your bag is doubled when the bag is wide open. So, whatever you're going to use, just make sure it is twice as long as your opening, plus some inches on the side. Maybe 5 inches longer than your opening is doubled. And then you're going to use a bodkin. And this is a little bodkin I just recently acquired. It pinches whatever you need to string through, and then the little ring holds it in tight. Makes it pinch even harder. You just pinch it onto, again, whatever you're going to use for cord, and you'll string it through. And I'm going to check to see this seam allowance, which way direction it is going. And I'm going to go with it and not against it. So go ahead and put your bodkin through the casing. And depending on what hand you are, you'll work from your dominant hand to your non-dominant hand. Just pile it onto the bodkin and then release it off the bodkin and pull it all the way through. You want to get it kind of even on the edges there. And that is a bodkin. You do not need a bodkin. Don't run out and buy one. You can easily use a safety pin. Safety pins come in all sizes. You want one that is going to fit through your casing, the opening of your casing, and not just the opening of your casing, but all the way around your casing. So if your casing is uneven, find the narrowest part and get the safety pin that fits in that narrow part, because you don't want to get it stuck in the middle. So I'm going with the medium-sized safety pin. And the end of my cord, this is twill tape, which is sort of like ribbon if you have that. To finish that off so it won't unravel, I could fold it down twice and then stitch the edge. Or I can use some fray check or even a drop of fabric glue. Or probably even Elmer's, except it is going in the wash, so don't use washable glue. Go ahead and attach your cord or your ribbon or whatever you're using to the safety pin by just sticking the safety pin through it. There we have it. And then I checked the side seam, but this bag didn't have a side seam. And then again, same idea. You push that safety pin through and you push the fabric onto the safety pin, and then you bring the fabric off of the safety pin on the other end. So I'm pushing it on with my left hand and I'm taking it off with my right hand. And that's because I'm right-handed. If I was left-handed, it'd be the opposite. And then when the safety pin comes all the way through, get it nice and straight and even out your ends. Now it's time to apply the cord stoppers. This one is plastic. I found it off some things my kids had ages ago. And these I bought, they're metal. I understand the metal ones last longer, but let me show you how they work. So it has a hole on the top, but this little plunger, you push down that top part into the bottom part and you'll get the complete hole, right? And those metal ones are a little hard, like I said. And the same with the plastic. It has a little hole on the top, it looks like, but then when you plunge it down, there's the complete hole. And that's the part the cord goes through. Much easier, those plastic ones. So put your cords together on top of each other, and if they're thick or wide, go ahead and fold them in half, and then put them on through the cord stopper. Somehow get them through, pull them through to the other side. And then we're going to knot it so that we don't accidentally lose our stoppers when we open up the bag. If there's not enough room to knot, and there isn't in this case, just move your bag, make it short, closed up, and then you have plenty of room to tie the knot. Tie it toward the end, because you don't want to make it too small of an opening. Pull it tight. And see when it's pulled, when I close my bag, I'll just bring my cord stopper up, and then when I release my bag, open my bag, my cord stopper doesn't fall off the cord. All right, and then the last step is you have to weigh your bags, and all the bags weigh differently unless you made them all identically the same. I used a food scale. If you don't have a food scale, you can take it to the store that you're buying your bulk items, and they will weigh it for you. So I've weighed it in grams, and then I weighed it again just to be sure. You know, I just did it twice. And I want to put the tare weight on here on the bottom, so when there's food in the bag and it's closed up and it's bulky, the cashier will be able to see the tare weight. So go ahead and write it somewhere on the bottom. I'm using a Sharpie because, again, I want to throw these in the wash machine. If I had a laundry marker, I would use that, but I don't. So label it nice and clear, tare weight, what it is and what measurement you used, ounces or grams, whatever you used. And then when you fill up your food and you need to write the bin number, a washable crown, you just write the bin number right on it. And I, of course, did that and then put the food in the bag. And the washable crown will come right out when you throw these bags in the wash. After you've emptied your food into your containers at home, you just toss these into the hamper. When you do your kitchen towels and all your other towels, you do your bulk bags too, and that bin number comes right off. Well, I hope you've enjoyed making this project. As you can see, I made quite a few. I've taken them to the store, didn't have any problems using them. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below, and I'll be sure to reply. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.